Maya Johnson sat quietly on the worn wooden bench outside Lincoln Middle School, her small fingers carefully turning the pages of her favorite science book. The autumn breeze gently rustled the colorful leaves around her feet as she waited for her best friend Sarah to join her for their weekly library study session. At just 10 years old, Maya was already known throughout her school as one of the brightest students in her class. Her dark curly hair was neatly pulled back into two braids, tied with her school's blue and white ribbons. Her pristine uniform and shiny black shoes reflected her mother's attention to detail, a trait that came naturally to Special Agent Diana Johnson, though Maya's classmates had no idea about her mother's real profession. The school grounds were mostly empty now, with just a few students lingering around waiting for their after-school activities to begin. Maya checked her pink Hello Kitty watch, a gift from her mother after getting straight A's last semester. It was 3:15 p.m., and Sarah was running late, which was unusual for her typically punctual friend. Mrs. Thompson, Maya's science teacher, walked past and smiled warmly. "Still waiting for Sarah, Maya? I heard she might be running late because of a dentist appointment." Maya's face brightened with understanding. "Oh, that's right. She mentioned that yesterday. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." As the teacher walked away, Maya returned to her book, completely absorbed in a chapter about space exploration. She didn't notice the police cruiser that had been circling the block, nor did she see Officer James Barrett watching her through his window with suspicious eyes. Officer Barrett was new to this precinct, having been transferred from the 43rd District under mysterious circumstances that sparked rumors among his colleagues. What wasn't a rumor, however, were the multiple complaints filed against him for racial profiling and excessive force, all of which had been conveniently buried in the system. The police cruiser pulled up to the curb, and Officer Barrett stepped out, adjusting his belt with an air of authority that had intimidated countless civilians before. His boots made heavy sounds against the pavement as he approached Maya, casting a long shadow over her book. Maya looked up, her innocent brown eyes meeting his cold stare. Years of her mother's careful teaching about dealing with law enforcement kicked in immediately. Stay calm, be respectful, but know your rights. "What are you doing here?" Officer Barrett demanded, his hand resting purposefully on his belt. Maya sat up straighter, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. "I'm waiting for my friend, sir. We're going to the library to study." Officer Barrett scoffed, looking around the nearly empty school grounds. "School ended almost an hour ago. You shouldn't be loitering here." "I'm not loitering, sir," Maya replied politely, reaching for her backpack to show him her student ID. "I'm a student here, and I have permission to wait for my study group." But before she could unzip her bag, Officer Barrett grabbed her wrist. "Hands where I can see them. You could be reaching for anything in there." Maya's eyes widened in shock and fear, but she remembered her mother's words. "If you're ever scared, baby, remember who you are. Remember that you have nothing to be ashamed of, and that the truth will always come out." A few remaining students had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some had already pulled out their phones, recording the interaction between the towering police officer and the small girl in pigtails. "Sir, my name is Maya Johnson. I'm a student here, and my mother," she began, but Officer Barrett cut her off. "Save it for the station. You're coming with me for suspicious behavior and possible truancy." The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around Maya's small wrists, making her wince. Tears threatened to fall from her eyes. She held them back, remembering her mother's strength, unaware that her next phone call would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the entire police department to its core. As Officer Barrett led her to his patrol car, Maya caught sight of Mrs. Thompson running toward the parking lot, phone in hand, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. The science teacher's fingers flew across her phone screen, dialing a number she had been given at the beginning of the school year, a number she had been told to use only in emergencies. Little did Officer Barrett know that his next few hours would completely change his life, and not in the way he expected. The small girl he was arresting wasn't just any student. She was the daughter of one of the FBI's most respected agents, and the storm that was about to hit would be unlike anything he had ever faced. The police station buzzed with its usual afternoon activity as Officer Barrett marched Maya through the front doors. The sight of a small girl in handcuffs drew concerned looks from several officers and staff members, but none dared to question Barrett directly, given his reputation for aggressive responses to any challenge of his authority. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez sat at the front desk, her experienced eyes narrowing as she watched Barrett roughly guide the child toward the booking area. In her 20 years on the force, something about this scene felt terribly wrong. The girl's pristine school uniform, her composed demeanor despite obvious fear, and the clearly visible student ID card hanging from her backpack all raised red flags. "Officer Barrett," Sergeant Rodriguez called out, her voice firm. "Care to explain why you're bringing in someone who appears to be a middle school student?" Barrett's face reddened slightly. "Caught her loitering around Lincoln Middle School. Suspicious behavior, possible truancy. Refused to comply with orders." Maya stood silently, her small wrists still bound behind her back, but her head remained high. A single tear rolled down her cheek, though her expression remained surprisingly dignified for someone so young. "My name is Maya Johnson," she said clearly, looking directly at Sergeant Rodriguez. "I'm a student at Lincoln Middle School. I was waiting for my friend Sarah for our library study group. My mother needs to be contacted immediately." Rodriguez noticed the slight tremor in the girl's voice, but was impressed by her composure. "Officer Barrett, remove those handcuffs immediately. This is a child, not a criminal." Barrett hesitated, his jaw clenching. "Protocol states. Remove them. Now." Rodriguez's tone left no room for argument. As the handcuffs came off, Maya rubbed her wrists, small red marks visible where the metal had been too tight. Rodriguez's blood boiled at the sight, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Maya, honey, please come sit here." Rodriguez gestured to a chair near her desk. "We're going to call your mother right away. What's her number?" Before Maya could answer, Mrs. Thompson burst through the station doors, out of breath and clutching her phone. "I've already called her mother," she announced. "She's on her way." Barrett smirked, clearly expecting some helpless parent who would be easily intimidated. "Good, we can discuss her daughter's delinquent behavior." Mrs. Thompson's face showed an odd mixture of anger and something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Oh, I don't think you understand the situation, Officer Barrett." Just then, multiple phones throughout the station began ringing simultaneously. The desk sergeant's face paled as he listened to his call. Two senior officers emerged from their offices, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Maya sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, watching as the station's atmosphere shifted dramatically. She recognized the signs. Her mother's presence was already being felt before she even arrived. Officer Barrett was in the middle of filling out his incident report when Captain Stevens rushed out of his office, face flushed. "Barrett, my office now." "Sir, I'm in the middle of processing a suspect." "That suspect is the daughter of Special Agent Diana Johnson of the FBI's Civil Rights Division," Captain Stevens hissed through clenched teeth. "And her mother is about to arrive with a team of federal agents and the Department of Justice Oversight Committee." The color drained from Barrett's face as the implications sank in. Around the station, officers and staff members who had been pretending not to watch the scene unfold now stared openly. Some wore expressions of shock, others of grim satisfaction. Barrett's reputation for racial profiling was well known, but until now, no one had been able to challenge him effectively. Maya remained seated, her posture perfect, as years of watching her mother handle difficult situations had taught her. She knew what was coming. Her mother had always told her that sometimes the best response to injustice was to wait quietly for justice to arrive. The distant sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the station made everyone freeze. Heavy boots could be heard approaching the entrance. Officer Barrett stood rooted to the spot, his report forgotten in his trembling hands, as the station doors burst open. Special Agent Diana Johnson strode in, her FBI tactical vest still on from the operation she'd been pulled away from, followed by a team of agents and Justice Department officials. Her eyes found her daughter first, checking her for any signs of harm, before turning an icy gaze toward Officer Barrett. The real storm was about to begin, and everyone in the station knew it. Special Agent Diana Johnson's presence commanded the entire police station. Her tactical vest bore the bold FBI letters, and her badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. But it was her eyes, fierce and focused, that held everyone's attention as she moved directly toward her daughter. "Maya, baby, are you hurt?" Diana asked, her voice soft but controlled as she knelt before her daughter. Her trained eyes quickly noticed the red marks on Maya's wrists. "I'm okay, Mom," Maya whispered, finally allowing herself to show some vulnerability now that her mother was present. "I did everything you taught me. I stayed calm and remembered my rights." Diana hugged her daughter tightly, then stood to her full height, transforming from concerned mother to federal agent in an instant. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as she turned to face Officer Barrett. "Officer James Barrett," she stated, her voice carrying across the now silent station. "I believe we need to discuss your actions today. Captain Stevens, I'll need your conference room and access to all bodycam footage, surveillance videos, and incident reports immediately." Captain Stevens nodded quickly. "Of course, Agent Johnson. Everything will be made available to you right away." Barrett, who had been standing frozen, finally found his voice. "This is a local police matter. The FBI has no jurisdiction." "Officer Barrett," Diana cut in sharply, "when you decided to handcuff my 10-year-old daughter for reading a book while black, you made this a federal civil rights issue. Your body camera footage has already been uploaded to our servers, and my team is reviewing your entire service record as we speak." From behind Diana, two Justice Department officials were already setting up laptops. Another FBI agent was interviewing Mrs. Thompson, while others began collecting statements from witnesses who had recorded the incident outside the school. Sergeant Rodriguez approached with an ice pack for Maya's wrists, shooting a disgusted look at Barrett. "Agent Johnson, I'd like to formally apologize for what happened today. This isn't what our department stands for." Diana nodded acknowledgement but kept her focus on Barrett. "Your transfer from the 43rd Precinct caught our attention months ago, Officer Barrett. 5 complaints of racial profiling in 2 years, all mysteriously buried. 2 incidents involving minors. We've been building a case, but I never expected you to provide such clear evidence by targeting my own child." Barrett's face switched between red and pale as he realized the magnitude of his situation. "I was following protocol for suspicious." "A protocol that you selectively enforce," Diana interrupted. "The security cameras at Lincoln Middle School show 3 other students, none of them black, sitting in the exact same area today. You drove past them 4 times before focusing on my daughter." Captain Stevens, who had returned with a stack of files, looked sick. "Agent Johnson, I assure you will cooperate fully with your investigation." "That's wise," Diana replied, "because this investigation isn't just about Officer Barrett anymore. We're looking at institutional patterns, training procedures, and every complaint filed in this precinct for the past 5 years." The Justice Department officials had finished setting up their equipment. One of them called out, "Agent Johnson, we're ready to begin the official interview." Diana turned to Sergeant Rodriguez. "Would you mind staying with Maya while we conduct these interviews? I think she could use a friendly face right now." Rodriguez smiled warmly at Maya. "It would be my pleasure. We've got some hot chocolate in the break room, and I'd love to hear about that science book you were reading." As Maya went with Rodriguez, Diana faced Barrett one final time. "Officer Barrett, you have 2 choices. You can either resign immediately, or you can face a federal investigation that will examine every arrest you've ever made, every complaint filed against you, and every instance where you've abused your authority. Choose wisely." Barrett's shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions finally hit him. Around the station, other officers watched with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Some had been waiting years for someone to finally stand up to Barrett's behavior. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the station windows as Diana followed Barrett and the Justice Department officials into the conference room. This case would become a turning point for the department, though none of them knew it yet. What had started as one officer's racist assumptions would end in a complete overhaul of police training and accountability procedures. And somewhere in the break room, Maya Johnson sat with Sergeant Rodriguez, sipping hot chocolate and explaining the fascinating chapter about space exploration she had been reading when all this began. The conference room buzzed with tense energy as Officer Barrett sat facing Special Agent Diana Johnson and the Justice Department officials. The desk between them was covered with files, photographs, and laptop screens displaying various video footage from the incident. "Let's review your statement, Officer Barrett," said Diana, her voice professionally detached as she read from a document. "You claim you observed suspicious behavior from a minor who was sitting on a school bench." Barrett shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The area has had problems with truancy. Interesting, Diana interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. Because according to school records, there hasn't been a single reported case of truancy at Lincoln Middle School this academic year. In fact, it has one of the highest attendance rates in the district. Outside the conference room, Maya sat with Sergeant Rodriguez, who had become increasingly protective of the young girl. They could see through the glass windows as Diana methodically dismantled Barrett's excuses one by one. "Your mother is quite impressive," Rodriguez said softly to Maya. "I'd never seen anyone handle an investigation like this." Maya nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Mom always says that justice doesn't need to be loud to be powerful." Inside the conference room, one of the Justice Department officials, Sarah Chen, was reviewing Barrett's body camera footage on a large screen. "Officer Barrett, can you explain why you ignored department protocol requiring officers to contact school administration before approaching any student on school grounds?" Barrett's attorney, who had arrived looking harried and unprepared, attempted to intervene. "My client was acting on reasonable suspicion." "Let's talk about reasonable suspicion," Diana cut in, pulling up more security footage. "These cameras show you passing by 3 other students, all white, who were also sitting on school grounds. You circled the block 4 times, Officer Barrett. Care to explain why my daughter was the only suspicious student you noticed?" The evidence continued to mount. Each new piece of documentation revealed a pattern that became increasingly impossible to defend. Barrett's past complaints, his selective enforcement of regulations, and his history of targeting minorities created a damning picture. Meanwhile, in the main station area, news had begun to spread. Local media vans were gathering outside, and the police union representative had arrived, looking grave after reviewing the preliminary evidence. Captain Stevens paced in his office, making call after call to the police commissioner and city officials. The implications of this case were growing beyond anything he had anticipated. This wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about to expose systemic issues that had been ignored for far too long. Back in the conference room, Diana pulled out one final file. "Officer Barrett, are you familiar with the name Michael Robinson?" Barrett's face showed a flicker of recognition before he could hide it. "Michael was a 12-year-old boy you arrested last year at another school. The charges were dropped, but the trauma caused him to switch schools. His family was too afraid to file a formal complaint." Diana's voice carried a controlled anger. "He was reading a book too, wasn't he?" The police union representative, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "Officer Barrett, given the evidence presented, I strongly recommend you consider Agent Johnson's earlier offer of resignation." Barrett looked around the room, seeing no sympathetic faces. His years of unchecked behavior had finally caught up with him, triggered by the mistake of targeting the wrong child. Not that there had ever been a right child to target. I would like to resign," he said quietly. Diana nodded to one of the justice officials, who slid the resignation papers across the table. But before Barrett could sign, she spoke again. "Your resignation will be accepted, but this investigation isn't over. We'll be reviewing every arrest you've made, every interaction you've had, and every complaint that was buried. The families you've hurt deserve justice." As Barrett signed his resignation, Maya watched through the conference room windows. She squeezed Sergeant Rodriguez's hand, understanding that what had happened to her today would help prevent other children from experiencing the same fear and humiliation. Diana gathered her documents, knowing this was just the beginning. The real work would be in changing the system that had allowed Barrett to operate unchecked for so long. But for now, she had a daughter to take home in comfort, and a message to send to every officer who might think about following in Barrett's footsteps. The afternoon sun was setting as justice took its first steps toward real change in the department. News of Officer Barrett's resignation spread through the police department like wildfire. By the next morning, local news stations had picked up the story, and protesters had gathered outside the station demanding a broader investigation into police practices. Diana sat in Captain Stevens' office, reviewing files with a team of FBI analysts. The investigation had expanded beyond Barrett, revealing a troubling pattern of similar incidents that had been systematically downplayed or ignored. Agent Johnson called out one of her analysts. "We found something interesting. Over the past 3 years, there have been 27 similar incidents involving minors of color at local schools. All of them were classified as routine checks and buried in the system. Diana's jaw tightened as she examined the data. Cross-reference these incidents with officer assignments. I want to know if Barrett was working with others. Meanwhile, Maya had become something of a symbol at Lincoln Middle School. Students and teachers alike treated her with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. Her friend Sarah finally caught up with her during lunch break. "Maya, you're all over the news," Sarah exclaimed, showing her phone. "They're calling your mom a hero for standing up to police discrimination." Maya picked at her lunch thoughtfully. "Mom says it's not about being a hero. It's about making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." Back at the station, the investigation was yielding disturbing results. 3 other officers had been identified as having similar patterns of behavior to Barrett. Captain Stevens sat at his desk, looking years older as he reviewed the evidence. "I should have seen this coming," he admitted to Diana. "We had the data, we had the complaints, but we chose not to look too closely." Diana leaned forward. "Captain, what matters now is how we fix this. My team has drafted a proposal for comprehensive reform, but we'll need your full cooperation." The proposal was extensive: mandatory bias training, new protocols for approaching minors, civilian oversight committees, and regular audits of officer conduct. It would fundamentally change how the department operated. As Diana presented these changes to the police union and department leadership, Maya was giving her own presentation at school. Her teacher had asked her to share her experience with the class as part of their social studies lesson on civil rights. "I was scared," Maya admitted to her classmates, "but my mom always taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. She showed me that standing up for what's right is more important than being afraid." The story had caught national attention. Civil rights organizations reached out to Diana, asking her to speak at conferences and help implement similar reforms in other cities. But Diana's priority remained the local investigation. By late afternoon, she was back in the station's conference room, now filled with community leaders, police officials, and Justice Department representatives. The atmosphere was tense but focused. "This isn't just about punishing bad officers," Diana explained to the group. "It's about creating a system where these incidents can't happen in the first place, where officers who show concerning behavior are identified and addressed before they can cause harm." One of the community leaders, Reverend Marcus Thompson, spoke up. "What happened to Maya was terrible, but it's given us an opportunity. For years, our complaints fell on deaf ears. Now, finally, people are listening." As the meeting progressed, changes were already being implemented. Officer Barrett's resignation had triggered a department-wide review. 3 other officers were placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and the department's training protocols were being completely overhauled. Outside the station, reporters gathered as Diana emerged to make a statement. Maya stood beside her mother, head held high, as cameras flashed and microphones were thrust forward. "What happened to my daughter represents a systemic failure," Diana began, her voice clear and determined. "But it also represents an opportunity for change. Today, we're announcing comprehensive reforms that will ensure every child, regardless of their color, can feel safe in their community." As mother and daughter stood together before the cameras, their story was becoming more than just a local incident. It was becoming a catalyst for change, a reminder that sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments of injustice. The sun was setting on another day, but it was rising on a new era for the police department. And somewhere in the crowd, Sergeant Rodriguez watched with pride, knowing she was witnessing history in the making. 2 weeks after the incident, the police department underwent its most significant transformation in decades. Diana Johnson had temporarily relocated her FBI office to the station, converting a spare conference room into a command center for the ongoing investigation and reform efforts. The morning began with the first session of mandatory bias training for all officers. The training room was packed as Diana stood at the podium, with Maya surprisingly seated beside her. They had decided together that putting a face to the statistics might make a stronger impact. "Today, we're going to do something different," Diana announced to the room of officers. "Instead of just reviewing policies, you're going to hear directly from my daughter about how it feels to be wrongly targeted by someone who swore to protect and serve." Maya stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I used to want to be a police officer," she began, causing several officers to shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I thought you were all heroes, but that day I learned that some of you see me as a threat just because of how I look." The room fell silent as Maya described her experience. She spoke about the fear, the humiliation, but also about Sergeant Rodriguez's kindness and how it reminded her that there were still good officers who deserved their badges. In another part of the station, federal investigators continued their work. They had uncovered dozens of similar incidents that had been swept under the rug. Each case file represented another child who had been traumatized, another family whose trust in law enforcement had been shattered. Agent Johnson called out one of the investigators. "We found something interesting in Barrett's phone records. He was part of a private group chat with officers from 3 other precincts. The contents are concerning." Diana reviewed the messages, her expression hardening. The investigation was about to expand beyond just their department. The problem was more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. Meanwhile, Captain Stevens had embraced the changes with unexpected enthusiasm. He'd spent years trying to work within a broken system, and now he had the support to fix it. New protocols were being implemented daily, and officers were being retrained on proper procedures for interacting with minors. "We're setting up a civilian oversight committee," he explained to Diana during their afternoon meeting. "We want community members to have real power in reviewing officer conduct. No more buried complaints, no more looking the other way." The most significant change came in the form of the Maya Protocol, a new set of guidelines for officers approaching minors. It required body cameras to be activated, school administrators to be notified, and a social worker to be present during any questioning of underage individuals. Back in the training room, Maya was concluding her presentation. "I don't hate police officers," she said, looking around the room. "I hate that some of you let fear and prejudice make your decisions for you. My mom always says that true courage is admitting when you're wrong and working to do better." As Maya stepped down, several officers were visibly moved. One veteran officer stood up, removed his badge, and walked to the front of the room. "I've been on the force for 20 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I've seen things like this happen before. But I never spoke up. I'm sorry. I want to be part of the change." By late afternoon, Diana received word that the Justice Department was expanding their investigation to neighboring districts. The ripple effects of Maya's incident were spreading, forcing departments across the state to examine their practices. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had become something of a mentor to Maya, organized a community outreach program where officers would regularly visit schools to build positive relationships with students. The first session was scheduled for the following week at Lincoln Middle School. As the day wound down, Diana and Maya walked through the station together. Officers who once might have viewed them with suspicion now greeted them with respect and, in many cases, gratitude. The atmosphere had shifted from defensive resistance to collaborative reform. "Mom," Maya said as they reached their car, "do you think things will really change?" Diana looked at her daughter, seeing not just a victim of discrimination, but a catalyst for transformation. "Change is already happening, baby, and it started because you were brave enough to stand up for what's right." The setting sun cast long shadows across the police station's parking lot, but for the first time in weeks, those shadows didn't seem quite so dark. Real change was taking root, and it had started with one little girl who refused to be silenced. 1 month after the incident, the changes at the police department had begun showing real results. The morning started with Diana reviewing the latest progress reports in her temporary office when Maya burst in, excited about a new development at school. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," Maya exclaimed, holding up a student newspaper. "Our school started a Know Your Rights club, and they want me to be the president." Diana smiled proudly at her daughter, who had transformed from a victim into a young activist. The front page of the student paper featured Maya's story and its impact on the community. What had started as a traumatic incident had sparked a movement led by young voices. At the police station, the changes were equally dramatic. The newly formed Civilian Oversight Committee was holding its first official meeting, with community members reviewing officer conduct reports and body camera footage. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been promoted to lead the department's new youth engagement division, presented the latest statistics. In the past month, since implementing the Maya Protocol, Rodriguez reported, we've seen a 70% decrease in confrontational interactions between officers and minors. Our community trust ratings have improved significantly. The investigation had expanded beyond their initial expectations. Diana's team had uncovered similar patterns of behavior in neighboring districts, leading to a statewide review of police practices. Former Officer Barrett's case had become a cautionary tale in police academies across the country. In the afternoon, Maya visited the station to participate in a new training program. She stood before a group of police cadets, sharing her story not with fear or anger, but with hope for change. Before this happened, Maya told the cadets, "I thought police officers were either good or bad. Now I understand it's about the choices you make every day. Each of you has the power to choose what kind of officer you want to be." The cadets listened intently, many of them taking notes. One raised his hand. "How can we make sure we never make the same mistakes Officer Barrett made?" Maya thought for a moment before answering. "My mom says that good police work starts with seeing people as people, not as suspicious or dangerous just because they look different from you." Meanwhile, Diana was meeting with state officials about expanding the reforms statewide. The Maya Protocol had caught the attention of police departments across the country, with many requesting guidance on implementing similar changes. What happened to Maya could have been just another statistic, Diana explained to the officials. Instead, it became a catalyst for change because we refused to let it be buried or forgotten. Back at Lincoln Middle School, the Know Your Rights Club had grown to include students from all backgrounds. They organized workshops where police officers, including Sergeant Rodriguez, came to speak with students about their rights and responsibilities. The most surprising development came when Captain Stevens announced his retirement. At his farewell ceremony, he made an unexpected speech. "For years, I thought being a good leader meant protecting my officers," he admitted. "Now I understand that true leadership means holding everyone accountable, including ourselves. This department is changing for the better, and it took the courage of a 10-year-old girl to show us the way." As the sun began to set, Maya and Diana sat together in their favorite ice cream shop, celebrating another successful day of training and reform implementation. Maya's vanilla cone was dripping slightly as she considered something. "Mom," she said thoughtfully, "remember when I said I didn't want to be a police officer anymore?" Diana nodded, waiting for her daughter to continue. "Well, I think I changed my mind. Not now, but maybe when I'm older, because now I know that one good officer can make a real difference." Diana hugged her daughter, ice cream and all, feeling proud of how Maya had turned a traumatic experience into a mission for positive change. Outside the ice cream shop, they could see a police car drive by. The officer inside waved at Maya, and she waved back without hesitation. It was a small gesture, but it represented everything they had been working toward. A community where law enforcement and citizens, especially young black children, could interact without fear or prejudice. The day ended with Maya working on her speech for next week's school assembly about community policing. Her experience had taught her that change was possible, even in the face of deeply rooted problems. She was no longer just the girl who had been wrongly arrested. She was becoming a leader in her own right, showing that even the youngest voices could make the biggest differences. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Maya Johnson stood at a podium in City Hall, addressing a packed chamber of police officials. "When I was handcuffed for reading a book," Maya began, her voice clear and confident, "I never imagined that moment would lead to today. But sometimes the worst moments in our lives can create the best changes for everyone." Diana watched from the front row, dressed in her formal FBI attire, beaming with pride. The legislation being signed into law today was officially called the Juvenile Protection and Police Accountability Act, but everyone knew it as the Maya Law. The new law mandated strict protocols for police interactions with minors, required comprehensive bias training for all officers, and established permanent civilian oversight committees in every precinct across the state. It was the most significant police reform legislation in the state's history. Sergeant Rodriguez, now Chief Rodriguez after her recent promotion, stood to present the department's latest statistics. Under her leadership, the department had become a national model for community policing. In the past 6 months, Rodriguez reported, "We've seen an 85% reduction in complaints against officers. Our community trust ratings are at an all-time high, and most importantly, not a single minor has been wrongfully detained since implementing the Maya Protocol." The audience applauded, but the most significant changes weren't just in the statistics. Throughout the city, police officers and community members were building real relationships. The Know Your Rights clubs that started at Lincoln Middle School had spread to every school in the district. Former Officer Barrett's case had become a mandatory case study in police academies nationwide. His story served as a powerful warning about the consequences of unchecked bias and abuse of power. Maya continued her speech, sharing how the experience had changed her perspective on justice and leadership. I learned that change doesn't just happen because of big people making big decisions. Sometimes it starts with small moments and brave choices. In the audience sat Michael Robinson, the boy Barrett had wrongfully arrested the year before Maya. He and his family had finally found the courage to share their story, leading to the review and dismissal of dozens of Barrett's past arrests. Today isn't just about new laws, Maya explained. It's about building a community where everyone feels safe, where the color of your skin doesn't determine how you're treated by the people sworn to protect you. Diana was called to the podium next. She had recently been promoted to lead a new FBI task force focused on implementing similar reforms nationwide. Departments across the country were requesting guidance on adopting the Maya Protocol. 6 months ago, my daughter was wrongfully arrested, Diana began. Today, she's helping to change the system that allowed that to happen. But our work isn't finished. This law is just the beginning. After the ceremony, Maya's classmates surprised her with a celebration. They had created a wall of positive messages in the school hallway, sharing stories of how the changes had affected their lives and communities. Later that evening, Maya and Diana walked through their neighborhood, something they now did regularly without fear. They passed a police car, and the officer inside smiled and waved. Maya waved back, remembering how different things had been just 6 months ago. "Mom," Maya said thoughtfully, "remember when you told me that sometimes bad things happen so we can make good changes?" Diana nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Well, I think I understand that now. What happened to me was scary, but look at all the good things that came from it. We helped make things better for everyone." As they reached their favorite ice cream shop, they saw Chief Rodriguez inside with her own daughter. The two families joined together, celebrating not just the new law, but the friendships and changes that had grown from that difficult day. The sun set on the city, casting a warm glow over the streets where Maya had once felt afraid. Now, those same streets represented hope and progress. She had learned that justice wasn't just about punishing wrong actions. It was about creating positive change that would last for generations to come. Maya took one last lick of her ice cream cone and smiled. She knew that while their story had started with fear and injustice, it had ended with something much more powerful: hope for a better future and proof that even the smallest voices could make the biggest differences. And somewhere in the city, a young police cadet was studying the Maya Protocol, learning that true justice begins with seeing the humanity in every person, no matter their age or color.